If you're an American watching this before November the 5th, then your country needs you. America is facing one of the most important elections of our lifetime. Again, with the current Vice President Kamala Harris going up against the former President Donald Trump, the only president in history to have a criminal conviction and whose alleged attempts to interfere with the legitimacy of the last election, along with his public claims of widespread voter fraud, helped incite an insurrection and led to the storming of the Capitol on January 6th. In this video, I'll be covering Trump's various controversies in both the past and present, while looking at the very real threat he poses to our future, and what we can do about it. So without further ado, let's dive straight in. It's 2024, and Donald Trump is yet again the Republican nominee. Up until a couple of months ago, it looked like he'd be facing off against Biden in one of the worst retellings of Groundhog Day I'd ever seen. Luckily, Biden has been spared a potential defeat and is now free to wander aimlessly in any direction except the intended one.
Mr. President, thank you. At the end of such a momentous event.
But before we get to the threat Trump poses today, let's start with the damage he's already done. On January 20th of 2017, Trump became President of the United States of America. Notably as the first president in American history to have no prior military or government experience, which he demonstrated by turning America into a joke on the world stage.
I think I would have been a good general, but who knows?
Controversy surrounded Trump long before his presidential bid began, though. From recordings where he boasted about groping women, to questioning the authenticity of former President Obama's birth certificate and citizenship, allegations of racism and sexism are never far from Donny Boy. One controversy that refused to die, though, were the whispers of affairs with Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels that allegedly took place in 2006, around the time Trump's wife Melania gave birth to their son. While both McDougal and Daniels would come forward to try and sell their stories in 2016, various dealings led to them being bought but never published, with Karen McDougal's account being bought for $150,000 only to be silenced. This was revealed by the Wall Street Journal in November 2016, but just 4 days later, Trump was elected president. Stormy Daniels' story would resurface in 2018, but that's not really relevant right now. Anyway, the Trump years were an unorthodox period to say the least, and trying to cover every major scandal would be an exercise in futility. Some of the greatest hits included issuing an executive order banning immigrants and refugees from 6 majority Muslim countries while violating international law, spending $15 billion constructing part of a border wall while his allies conspired to defraud donors, started a trade war with China leading to major tariffs on $550 billion of Chinese goods, and withdrew from the Paris Agreement combating climate change because he believed that it wasn't America-centric enough.
I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
I mean, I'd argue a doomsday scenario where the world goes up in a ball of flame sounds very American, but who am I to argue with a man who uses enough fake tan to pose as a Dorito? Each of the points I just mentioned could easily fill an entire video on their own, but there's so much to cover about Trump that what would have been major failings under any other administration are instead footnotes of his time in power. If you want to learn more about anything I talk about though, I'll have a bunch of sources linked down below. One of the lingering questions from the 2016 election was how much had Russian interference had an impact on the outcome, and did Trump know about it?
The indictment charges 12 Russian military officers by name for conspiring to interfere with the 2016 presidential election.
After the firing of FBI Director James Comey, seemingly related to his unwillingness to drop the investigation into Russian interference, former FBI Director Robert Mueller was appointed as special counsel, overseeing the investigation and possible collusion with the Trump campaign. What came out of Mueller's report were a number of findings that left nobody happy. On the same day, Trump had said,
"Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press."
Russia first attempted to hack Hillary Clinton's emails, leading to an investigation into Clinton that impacted the 2016 election. The FBI issued a wanted list of 12 Russian intelligence officers who were behind the hack, and while Mueller asked Trump about his remarks, no direct link was alleged in his indictment. Something odd, though, was that despite this, Trump still attempted to interfere with the investigation, firing Comey and attempting to fire Mueller. In the end, Mueller didn't accuse the president of obstruction of justice, but it does make you wonder why he seemed so panicked about it. Very odd behavior for an innocent man. The Mueller report led to the indictment of 34 people and 3 businesses, with nearly 200 criminal charges. And while the report did detail a number of potentially impeachable offenses committed by Trump, Democrats were initially divided about whether to bring it forward. That was until...
The White House has just released a transcript of President Trump's July 25th phone call with Ukraine's president.
Before Ukrainian President Zelensky was forced to deal with a Russian megalomaniac, he unfortunately had to deal with an American one. Early on in Zelensky's presidency, a $400 million deal for security assistance was due to go through. You know, just your basic self-defense kit should one of your neighbors suddenly invite themselves over without permission. Well, I'm sure that's just a precaution. Just when the deal was supposed to go through, though, Trump snuck in just a teeny tiny request from Zelensky. Just something small, like investigating his main political rival, Joe Biden. I mean, what are friends for, right? From a whistleblower's account of a phone call between Trump and Zelensky, Trump strongly implied that the $400 million would only be released if Zelensky investigated unfounded allegations that Joe Biden had pressured the Ukrainian government whilst vice president to remove their prosecutor general to prevent him from looking into a gas company where Joe's son Hunter had allegedly committed wrongdoing. Blimey, okay, so there's a couple things wrong with this narrative. Firstly, Hunter Biden's time at the company wasn't even in the scope of the investigation. Secondly, the case had already been shelved before Joe Biden's statement. And thirdly, it might have been more to do with the rampant corruption of Ukraine's prosecutor, for which the EU had already criticized him. But anyway, a lot of Democrats weren't best pleased about Trump pressuring a foreign power to investigate a political rival over a conspiracy theory, and voted to impeach him. The Democrats impeached Trump on 2 charges: abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, meaning that Trump allegedly really likes obstruction for some reason. The problem with impeachment, though, is that it is a political process. I mean, you could probably blow up a bunny sanctuary as president and still have support. A 2/3 majority was required to convict, and given everyone mostly voted along party lines, it ended with Trump walking away from yet another scandal. And things weren't about to start getting better.
Growing concerns about the deadly coronavirus officially hitting the U.S.
While Boris Johnson was being an idiotic buffoon over the pond, Trump graciously fulfilled the role for America. On March 13th, 2020, Trump declared COVID-19 a national emergency, and yet his own attitude seemed to be a bit more unpredictable. From statements that everything was under control to "it's gonna be gone," Trump claimed he'd prevailed over the virus on the same day the US death toll reached 80,000 people. While Trump might have declared a national emergency in March, he was warned towards the end of January about the risks of COVID, but neglected to implement any measures to slow the spread. He continually downplayed the danger of the virus, claiming it would disappear even with the soaring death toll and rate of infection, and criticized health officials who weren't positive of his leadership, preferring instead to spread conspiracies, attributing the high numbers to various false causes. He even had his own version of the Partygate scandal, with pictures of White House officials breaking their own rules. Well, I guess Britain still exports some things at least. It's no secret that Trump has always had a bit of a strained relationship with the truth, but his weaponization of conspiracy theories and constant backhanded response to the very real emergency led to preventable American deaths. His insistence the pandemic was over and relaxing of restrictions led to a second wave. And even when Trump caught COVID, he couldn't help but promote a drug that studies say might even increase the risk of death in patients. Time and time again, Trump's words have caused real-world harm. And even with 350,000 American deaths by the end of 2020, somehow there's still more. For all the controversy surrounding Trump, both before and through his presidency, nobody could have predicted what would happen next. After an incredibly tight race between Trump and his Democratic rival Joe Biden, Trump lost by over 7 million votes, with Biden managing to secure swing states won by Trump back in 2016, as well as areas like Georgia and Arizona, which had been red states since the 90s. Evidently, the states had flirted with the Trump presidency before dropping him sharply when they actually got to know him. But like most scorned lovers, Trump wasn't about to just let it go. Given the ongoing pandemic at the time, the number of mail-in ballots was larger than normal, with the elderly and more at-risk people more likely to prefer mail-in than standing in line with a bunch of potentially sick people. The problem was, given conservatives had downplayed the dangers of the pandemic, including contradicting mask mandates, the people mailing in were more likely to be Democrats, with 65% of the validated mail-in votes going towards the Democrat Party. But given the mail-in votes would likely be counted later, A swing state might initially look red as all the in-person votes are counted, only to change blue when the mail-in ballots are included. While this might make sense as basic maths to a normal person, Trump and his supporters use this as supposed evidence of widespread voter fraud. The mail-in votes were misrepresented by conservative media, with Trump claiming it led to widespread fraud, despite absolutely no evidence. But it didn't stop there. From out-of-context videos with false claims of ballot tampering, election workers falsely accused of misconduct, and claims that the voting counting process was rigged, going over the full set of claims would take days. Luckily, there are a couple outlets that have done a good job covering the various false allegations, and I'll have them linked down below. One of the big claims was that the voting machines had been rigged for Biden, proving that Skynet is in on the woke liberal agenda. A lot of disinformation targeted Dominion voting systems, claiming things like they'd been raided by the military, to Trump personally tweeting they deleted 2.7 million votes. This was blatantly false. So blatant, in fact, that Fox News paid them $787 million to settle a case that would have exposed how the network promoted lies about the election. It may have also led Fox to drop Tucker Carlson faster than he could praise a Russian supermarket.
And coming to a Russian grocery store, the heart of evil, and seeing what things cost and how people live, it will radicalize you against our leaders.
But that's merely speculation. On the days following the election, as results continued to come in, the early red wave clashed with a sea of blue, and a nervous silence gripped the country. Joe Biden was positioned to become the next president of the United States. And yet, there was an uneasiness in the air, as people wondered if Trump, who was claiming to have won the election, would ever give up power. And more importantly, would he give it up peacefully? Before attending a rally in Washington, Trump again baselessly claimed that there was voter fraud, telling his supporters that in order to win, his vice president Mike Pence just had to subvert the will of the people to do it. Trump stood on a podium on January 6th, starting off saying,
"I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard."
But ending his message with,
"We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. We're going to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue," I love Pennsylvania Avenue, "and we're going to the Capitol."
I mean, talk about mixed signals. But far-right groups like the Proud Boys, along with other Trump supporters, definitely took the latter message more seriously. It probably helped that other prominent Trump cultists like Trump lawyer and possible sewage person Rudy Giuliani told them,
"Let's have trial by combat,"
which is a very normal thing to say, according to revisionists. To an outside observer, it would appear that Trump tried to cover himself with his early remarks to muddy the waters of his later statement, seeming to stir his supporters into a frenzy and aiming them directly at the US Capitol. At 1:45 on January 6th, an officer declares a riot at the Capitol building. While this was going on, Mike Pence, the guy Trump had asked to overturn the election, was in the process of not doing that, actually, which made Trump and his supporters rather unhappy. At roughly 2 p.m., rioters begin storming the Capitol, breaching the building and leading to Pence being evacuated minutes later. A number of the rioters were calling for Pence to be hanged, and if it hadn't been for a single officer leading them away, they might well have killed him, being only 30 meters away from Pence at one point. While this was happening, instead of calling for an end to the riots, at 2:24, Trump instead tweeted that Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should be done, essentially encouraging the rioters. At 4:17, he called for the mob to go home. 174 police officers were injured. 4 of them took their own lives within 7 months of the attack, and 1 rioter also died after being shot by police. On January 13th, Donald Trump became the only president in history to be impeached a second time. He was charged with inciting an insurrection, and while the majority in both the House of Representatives and the Senate voted Trump was guilty, due to impeachment needing a 2/3 majority, he escaped charges. If you were following what was happening on January 6th and saw him walk free yet again, you might have started to believe that Don truly was Teflon, but cracks were forming, and now more than ever, the pressure was mounting. So that being said, remember Stormy Daniels? Bit of an unlikely recurring character in the story, but now her story's relevant again. So, Daniels was paid $130,000 essentially to stay silent by then Trump lawyer Michael Cohen. Okay, so far so good. A bit morally dubious, but legally a-okay. The problem is, when Cohen paid Daniels, his reimbursement of the money was recorded as legal fees in Trump's accounts, disguising the payment and falsifying his business records. Again, a bit morally dubious, but this time it's legally not okay, very not okay. It's illegal, Donald! The New York hush money trial ended with Trump being charged and found guilty of 34 counts of fraud. Given this was a criminal case, Trump has become the only president to have a criminal record in history, although he'll be formally charged after the 2024 election, provided he doesn't win and try pardoning himself, that is. That being said, it's not like Stormy Daniels is Trump's only worry, as there are actually 3 more criminal cases that he's facing. In relation to the Capitol riot and attempts to overturn the election, he's facing 4 criminal counts, including conspiracy to defraud the US. In Georgia, he's accused of criminally conspiring to overturn the result, which he lost by a small margin, and is currently facing 10 criminal counts there. Lastly is a case about classified documents, looking at if Trump mishandled them by stashing troves of them away in his Mar-a-Lago residence. Given this case is based in Florida, ultra-red state and Dante's inspiration for all 9 circles of hell, the legal view is somewhat different to what it would be normally. Currently the case is up in the air, as a Trump-appointed judge dismissed the case, only for the prosecutor to appeal. So I guess we'll have to wait and see if it's legal to just take White House documents and hoard them. For anyone keeping count, Trump has been charged with 34 counts, with 14 more criminal charges he is yet to face, not including the additional 8 that are on hiatus in Florida. Legally, I think it's fair to say Trump is looking a little shaky, but if he gets in a second time, there's nothing to stop him trying to pardon himself. Everything his lawyers have done has been to play for time, and now they've got what they wanted. But the damage Trump caused doesn't just include his personal carnage. Before we get into the next section, if you like what you've heard so far or were horrified but thought I did a good job covering it, then please leave a like and a comment on the video to let YouTube know to push this video in the algorithm, and if you want to see what I do next, maybe even subscribe. But hey, back to the video. So we've looked at some of Trump's personal failings, but I want to quickly take a look at the impact Trump has had on the black community and women across America. In May 2020, George Floyd was murdered by a police officer who suffocated him for nearly 8 minutes. Stories like that of George Floyd have become all too common across America, and for many, this was a breaking point. There were protests in over 140 cities spanning across America, and while George Floyd's death was the catalyst, for many, the protests were about every black person that had been killed by police. While the majority of the protests were peaceful, there were also agitators who used it as an opportunity for disruption and looting, with scenes of chaos coming out of Minneapolis. This was a very heated moment in America, stemming from very real anger about systemic racial injustice, so any statement made would have to recognize the validity of the outrage while also calling for an end to the rioting and looting. But Trump preferred to paint all protesters as thugs, telling them that when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Hardly a message of diplomacy. It's 2024, and I think it's important to remind people of Trump's indifference at that time. He has never cared about black voters, other than to what extent they can help him, and the only promises he will deliver on will be those that undermine the republic he plans on leading, although we'll talk more about that later. The other major demographic I want to talk about here are women. From the start, Trump has had an uphill battle with trying to get women to vote for him, as surprisingly recordings of him bragging about groping them just didn't seem to win them over, strangely. While in office, Trump added 3 justices to the Supreme Court, massively tipping the balance to favor Republicans. And this would prove incredibly consequential, as one of the items on the chopping block would be Roe vs. Wade. For a bit of context, despite abortion being a medical procedure most countries recognize as a necessity, America decided they'd base their laws on Christian fundamentalism rather than science, which is a very normal thing for a world power to do. The sole protection preventing Republicans from using The Handmaid's Tale as an instruction guide was Roe v. Wade, a landmark case in 1969 that paved the way for the legalization of abortion. However, the right, specifically men on the right, have been trying to get abortion protections overturned for a long time, a move that would massively reduce the protections of women and could snowball into other restrictions. Because of Trump majorly shifting the Supreme Court in the far right's favor, they had enough conservative judges to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Supreme Court today, an historic upheaval. In a sweeping ruling that overturned a half a century of precedents, 5 justices ended the right of American women to choose abortion under the Constitution.
Currently, 14 states have near total bans on abortion from the moment of conception, meaning 22 million women are living in states where abortion is banned, with more states still trying to pass similar measures. The pundits who push these bans usually aren't women for one, but also have frighteningly little knowledge about the thing they're trying to ban. In Trump's pathetic performance when debating Kamala Harris, he talked about 8 or 9 month abortions.
They have abortion in the 9th month.
Something that doesn't happen. But do you think he'd mention something like an ectopic pregnancy? Something that would kill the mother if the fetus isn't removed, with the baby dying regardless? Not to mention the various other health complications and risks that come with carrying a baby for 9 months. An abortion can be a life-saving operation, but are doctors going to risk performing it if they could face prison time? Not to mention, women will now be limited in the medication they can access. If you need painkillers or other medication, the side effect could be inadvertently aborting a pregnancy, then you can't have it even if you aren't pregnant. Because if you have a uterus, then you have the potential to be pregnant. And at the end of the day, that's the only value you have to them. The ban doesn't even stop abortions, it'll just stop them from happening safely, with female mortality rates likely to rise in those states. But does Trump care about that? Do Republicans? Does the Supreme Court that overturned it? If Trump gets in a second term, it isn't unreasonable to bet that a complete abortion ban might be under consideration. I mean, they're already planning to remove anyone who doesn't agree with Trump. Why stop there? In whispered mutterings and conspiracy theories, the deep state is a common boogeyman. But you have to wonder, at what point does Trump become the deep state that his supporters hate so much? I mean, his party has control of the Supreme Court, they get the final word on legal challenges, and can overturn vital decisions over 50 years old. He's being charged with trying to subvert the will of the people in Georgia, as well as inciting an insurrection, which seems kinda deep statey to me. And a judge he appointed threw out a criminal case in Florida, seemingly due to personal bias. And currently in Georgia, a very important swing state, Republican judges on the state election board passed a new rule less than 100 days before the election, allowing them to demand more information before certifying, a move that could cause massive delays and prevent votes being certified on time, which Trump publicly praised them for. Across America, people aren't just facing Trump, but the many loyal soldiers he's inspired. And when those disciples are Supreme Court judges, or part of the state election board, it paints a picture of just how widespread the rot is. These aren't people who believe in conservatism and simply have a difference of opinion. They're followers of Trump's populism, willing to enact any change for him, even as he stands trial for inciting an insurrection. And if you think that's scary, just wait till you see what they plan to do in power.
Project 2025, a leading conservative think tank, is weighing in on what a second Trump presidency might look like.
If you've been following this election, you might have heard Project 2025 mentioned. And if you haven't, don't worry. I'm here to give you a newfound sense of existential dread. Project 2025 is an 887-page document outlining the next Trump presidency. Devised by a bunch of far-right kooks, including the Heritage Foundation and 100 other ultra-conservative think tanks, the project aims to outline steps to be taken by a Republican president, as well as how federal agencies should be governed. We touched on the damage Trump has enacted on abortion regulation already, but Project 2025 would go even further, ending funding for all abortion providers, withdrawing pills used for abortion from the market, and for the Department of Health and Human Services to maintain a biblically based, social science reinforced definition of marriage and family, or in other words, a non-science based right-wing view of the family, where the woman is presumably a housewife with no bodily autonomy, or as conservatives would call it, the good old days. Saving the environment also gets the short end of the stick, with it being seen as a war on oil and natural gas. Which I guess it is, I just never expected anyone to join the war on oil, on the side of oil. Also, YouTube doesn't like this word, but essentially all corn would be banned. Conservatives really not a fan of corn on the cob there. Surprised so many of the men at Trump rallies are alright with banning sweet corn, to be honest, but there we go. Project 2025 would also end diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, in what the document describes as a crackdown on woke ideology. But it's probably more so they can hire the same identical white guy for every position, along with the predictable stuff of abolishing critical race theory and gender ideology, and deleting terms like diversity, equity, and inclusion. So definitely going all in on the culture wars and taking it directly to the president's desk. I wonder if the left could bait them into a culture war against something random, like next election, Republicans against catgirls. The most concerning part of Project 2025 though, even with everything I've just covered, is something called Schedule F. Schedule F, named so for how effed everyone will be if it goes through, would drastically alter the divide of federal employees. Currently there are two groups that make up government institutions. The first group are career-based people, employed for their expertise and skill in a given area. Think scientists, data analysts, Elizabethan court jesters, and so on. Essentially any skill-based role that isn't politically appointed. Which brings us to the second group, who are the political appointees brought in by the president, such as cabinet secretaries. These people are employed to ensure that the president's goals are being delivered. The political appointees are a far smaller group than the career-based staff, but you need both to keep the country running. The PAs to enact the will of the president, and the career staff to give impartial data from their respective departments. But what if the balance of these groups were to change? Given the number of career employees stopping Trump in his first term, just because of things he said being false and illegal, Schedule F would massively shift the needle by replacing 50,000 career staff with political appointees, meaning they could be hired on their loyalty to the president rather than their expertise. Which could mean you have people who are blatantly unqualified pull in positions of national security just because they are blindly loyal to the president. Impartiality isn't good enough for these people, because an impartial judge won't simply go along with any bizarre conspiracy theory or culture war conservatives cook up. Better to replace all the critics with other radicals, and then the reports can say whatever you want. Finally, a system of power that Putin and Xi Jinping would be proud of. A Republican name, but autocracy in nature. If you're an American and you've been watching this, first of all, thank you for giving me a chance. But secondly, you might be wondering, why is this very funny and presumably handsome British guy so invested in our country? If you've watched my video on the UK's Conservative Party, it might not surprise you to learn that I'm quite invested in politics and follow it fairly closely. America is the self-proclaimed land of the free, but as the current major superpower, the US has a lot of influence on a world that is under constant threat from destabilizing forces. And if it doesn't use its political power, other superpowers absolutely will. China has been slowly using its Belt and Road Initiative to expand into Africa and Latin America, with over 147 countries signed onto projects or interested in doing so. If you want an image of what China looks like as a superpower, by the way, look no further than what happened in Hong Kong, or what is still happening to the Uyghur population in China. I don't have time to cover everything now, but I've linked a number of sources where you can find out more. But just think, if the Chinese Communist Party is willing to do this to their own people, how do you think they'd act as a dominant superpower? The other major player is Russia, and Putin hasn't exactly been shy about his plans for expansion, using the Wagner mercenaries to destabilize regions of Africa and pushing for Russian influence there. When you have two powerful nations, both of which are authoritarian, hoping to shape the world to be in their image, a counterbalance is needed. A nation with strong morals that can prevent democracy from being eroded, and smaller countries being preyed upon by these superpowers. Unfortunately, we don't really have that though, so America will have to do. Every time the United States has an election, the world holds its breath and prays. There's a reason Putin would prefer Trump to be in power, and why he's willing to finance right-wing pundits. Because a Trump presidency would be the best thing for Russia, and the new Soviet empire Putin hopes to achieve. In February 2022, Putin launched an invasion into Ukraine, with the aim of placing it back under Russian control. They had tested what they could get away with before with the invasion of Crimea during 2014, but severely miscalculated in 2022, suffering a humiliating setback as they failed to capture Kyiv in the first couple of weeks of the war. Zelensky and Ukraine have done a brilliant job repelling Russia's offensive, but this war has been going on for over 2 years, and they need help if they're going to show Russia that other countries are not free for the taking. It didn't stop with Crimea. It will not stop at Ukraine. Putin will keep on taking. And even if they do decide to stop just short of America, is the US really going to be the dominant power by that point? When Russia has influence over its trading partners, over what resources America has access to, the US will suffer as a result. But conservatives are more interested in fighting the left than the enemy on their doorstep. Hell, they'd rather befriend the dictator trying to use them than other Americans seemingly. I'm not going to touch on Israel and Palestine here. While there's a lot I could say about the horrors unfolding in Palestine right now, and I could easily fill a video twice the size of this one with condemnation of Netanyahu and his far-right government, it's too complex to properly condense into a couple of minutes, and I wouldn't be able to cover the nuances with the respect the topic deserves here. So all I'll say is that China and Russia have a vested interest in what happens in the Middle East and will be looking to gain further control and influence as a result. All this to say, a change in leadership isn't just about the damage it could do to America, but how it could drastically impact the rest of the world as well. Trump has already proven to be more of an ally to Vladimir Putin than to Ukraine, and wants to cut US aid to the country entirely, leaving it at a complete disadvantage when compared to Russia's resources. When Harris talked about Trump being a laughingstock on the world stage during their debate, she was right. America's allies know it, and so do Putin and Xi. Trump represents weakness on the world stage, at the expense of democratic countries and to the advantage of rivaling superpowers. His presidency won't just pave the way for an autocracy with Project 2025, the oppression of women's rights starting with abortion, or where science becomes based in populism rather than fact. Trump would leave America with a lasting legacy on the world stage, a supreme ruler of an empire of ash. Sometimes I feel like I'm in a time loop. I watch events play out, I see the consequences only for people to make the exact same mistakes down the line. All I can say is I sincerely hope I'm wrong. With every American election since 2016, it feels like democracy itself is at risk, with the rest of the world watching on from the sidelines, hoping there won't be a sudden shift in America's core values and policies. But this isn't just about the global threat of Trump. If you're a woman, Republicans aren't just going to stop at abortion, because this is really about limiting women's freedoms. How else are they supposed to return to the image of a dysfunctional nuclear family? If you're a person of color, when Project 2025 talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're really saying they want to be able to hire exclusively white men and don't want to be called discriminatory when being discriminatory. And if you're a parent, Trump doesn't care about climate change because, well, let's face it, it won't really affect him. But it will affect your children, and Trump plans to leave them with a scorched earth. I guess to summarize what I'm trying to say, if you're an American watching this before November the 5th, then your country needs you. Make sure that you're registered to vote and then double check your registration, especially in a state like Georgia, and help keep Trump out of the White House, so we can get to his sentencing appointment for the 34 criminal charges he was found guilty on. So, with that being said, God bless America, and good luck. Hey everyone, thanks for watching my slow descent into madness. I hope it was enjoyable at least. If it was, or just depressing but accurate, then please leave a like and a nice comment so YouTube pushes the video out to more people. And if you're curious about what I'm going to talk about next, maybe even subscribe. Also, huge thanks to Isabel for editing this video. You can find their links down below, and I highly recommend checking out some of their other stuff. I think I'm going to try and do more videos with a bit of a broader focus, and there's one about the cyberpunk genre which I thought would be interesting to take a look at, although I'm sure I'll still have time to rant about Doctor Who. I mean, there's always time for that. But hey, I've been Banquo, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in a bit.